very much, and thanks for inviting me to speak at this first Pan-African conference on access to information. And as we have already understood, we are focusing, and you are focusing on the most important issue. And the key issue in my view is not how governments and state organs may wish or even try to conceal information, but how the general public, i.e. the voters, can access information to hold their lords and masters accountable. I have spoken on this subject on a number of occasions during my 3 years in South Africa and Southern Africa, and we have had other events which we have been sponsoring. I know that this debate is sensitive, and I know that some see my participation in this debate as outside interference. It's not. The debate is and must be global and not limited to experts, insiders, journalists or politicians. In the era of internet, social media, mobile phones and mobile connectivity, those who speak about undue interference are simply wrong and out of sync. The issue is transparency. To reflect on how to achieve transparency is vital for the promotion of democracy in general and for the promotion of citizens' rights and empowerment in particular. The intense debate only corroborates the importance of transparency and access to information. A democratic society needs a continuous discussion on these issues, not only when this or that piece of legislation makes the headlines. Sweden regards the public right to information as extremely important. The principle of public access to information, freedom of expression and media freedom are fundamental tenets and also protected by law. It gives the general public, also foreigners, and media, of course, access to official records of the government and local authorities and their institutions. Exceptions to this principle are, of course, necessary. There are cases when information needs to be kept secret, but in the interest of the citizens. But these must be clearly defined exceptions and preferably agreed upon between the government of the day and the opposition. They have to be transparent in their limitations and credible in that they fall within an agreed and generally accepted framework. And also to be credible, the right to appeal a decision not to disclose information must exist. The basic and fundamental principle must be that information produced or held by the state or state authorities, by local governments, local authorities, must be accessible to the public. In Sweden, the principle of public access to official records also enshrines the right of civil servants and others who work for the government to freely inform media and others. Also in my position as Ambassador of Sweden to South Africa, I enjoy as a Swedish citizen exactly the same rights. People who provide publishers, editors, news agencies with information are entitled to source protection and anonymity protection, as journalists can never be asked or forced to reveal their sources. As a matter of fact, Sweden was the first country in the world to permit press freedom. It so happened in 1776. The ongoing debate in South Africa, I believe, there has been too much focus on print media and official documents. Let me therefore use this opportunity to widen the perspective somewhat to the rapid emergence of digital information in different forms, which we have been discussing earlier today. Of course, communication has now been totally revolutionized, and access to information is available for more or less anyone. And by bringing down sometimes high tariffs to affordable levels, providers like telecom can contribute to allow even more access to the net and thus participation in the debate. New technologies can assist in making or forcing governments to become more transparent and in stimulating citizens to take a more active role in the governance of their country. As already has been said, democracy is strengthened by participation and scrutiny. Transparency gives the public an opportunity to judge the performance of its authorities. Transparency reduces the risk of abuse of power and corruption, and transparency enforces accountability. Digital media allows for a higher degree of what we can call active transparency. With the web, it's easy to put official documents and records out there, to make them searchable and readily available to the public. My Minister for Development and International Cooperation, she has issued a transparency guarantee in the field of development, and she has taken an initiative which we call Open Aid. This entails digitalizing and digitally publishing the whole decision-making and evaluation process of our development assistance. By making it available on the internet, making it searchable and accessible from almost any corner of the world, that means that real transparency will increase. A very concrete result will also be that documentation will be accessible in the countries where the aid money is put to use, thus allowing a sort of transboundary transparency and scrutiny. The potential of the digital revolution is really inspiring, and we have recently witnessed it in Northern Africa, already been said. Today there are roughly 4 million mobile users worldwide, and if my number is correct, the internet users today roughly 4 billion, and of course the bandwidth grows all the time. At the same time, however, and the previous speaker slightly alluded to that, is that I would argue that the freedom of cyberspace is under threat from regimes seeking to control and limit the possibilities of their citizens. They are fighting a losing battle. Cyber wars are as certain to fall as the wars made of concrete have done before. I am old enough to remember something which has not been mentioned, and that is the Helsinki Final Act of 1975. Among other things, it ended the monopoly of information, which a number of undemocratic governments in then Central and Eastern Europe tried to shield their citizens from democratic influences and from calls for transparency. I was then posted in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, and I still remember that very day, August 1st, 1975, when the jamming of shortwave broadcasting ended. Don't forget, no mobile phones, no internet. That's the source of information at that point in time was shortwave radio. And then it was very obvious that when you wake up in the morning, the jamming stops, that this is the beginning of the end for undemocratic rule in that part of the world. Regardless of the technology, and this is my point, the right of access to information remains the same, and freedom of expression is a fundamental human right that, as already been said but needs to be repeated, is protected by a number of international conventions, and as you know, governments are the ones who are obliged to implement these conventions. Sweden's government has now made internet freedom a priority in our foreign policy. We are emphasizing that global efforts to promote and protect the freedoms of cyberspace should go hand in hand with protecting the infrastructure of cyberspace, which is also at the same time increasingly important to the running of our societies. Much like the way the rule of law is crucial for the protection of the freedoms we enjoy, we must also seek to shape the rules that protect the rights and the freedom of cyberspace. At the same time, and now comes the difficult part of it, at the same time, we must also recognize that the digital revolution raises new questions in the field of personal integrity and privacy. Let me give you an example again from my own experience. Out of the publication of pictures of the Prophet Muhammad in Denmark a few years ago, and then also later in Swedish media, we had an intensive debate was launched in Sweden, and the basic thing, are religious sentiments enough to justify encroachment on the right of freedom of expression? Our answer was no. Swedish Muslims, and we do have quite a few in Sweden, they were pressurized, in particular from abroad, to demand changes in Sweden's legislation. Then I should just mention that Sweden does not have blasphemy laws. We have laws of incitement. But what the outsider did not understand was that this debate took place in a Swedish environment. Yes, it's true, many Muslims were offended by this publication. But at the same time, they did understand that our strong legislation supporting freedom of expression and freedom of information was the ultimate guarantee for their right to exercise their religion. I believe that it would be beneficial to have a much broader and very public debate on these issues. Public access to official records, through digital media, and the internet as a means to strengthen freedom of expression and the respect for personal integrity and privacy. There are difficult judgments to be made in this field, and thus there is a need for a thorough debate. It requires a public discussion which must include all of us, and which should not be led by politicians or state-controlling authorities. Let the debate take its time in order to create a strong consensus, also on the limits necessary for security and for respect of privacy, and how these limits can be shaped not to infringe on scrutiny and accountability of governments and public stakeholders. I am convinced, also after listening to you this morning, that your knowledge, your experience and your drive will contribute greatly to such a debate. I am very proud that the Embassy of Sweden is a sponsor of this conference. You will indeed, I hope, be leading this discourse. As digital media is omnipresent and truly international, the discourse, even with your focus maybe the continent, will also be truly global. I thank you for your attention.